All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. This is Two Beards in a Bible. I'm John Swano.
I'm Dave Tenney.
And we're picking up where we left off, and we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning at verse 14.
It seems like what we're going to talk about is we're going to go several episodes ago, we were talking about in chapter 8, I think, about it's about things that were offered to idols, right? So some people would eat some food that were offered to idols, and they knew that the idols weren't real, and they knew it was okay, but maybe some other people got offended by that.
Right.
Paul's going to talk about that again here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the rest of chapter 10 is kind of about that idea.
All right.
I think.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
You want to read to verse 22?
Sure. Starting at 1 Corinthians chapter 10 at verse 14. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? The bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? For we, though many, are one bread and one body, for we all partake of that one bread. Observe Israel after the flesh. Are not those who eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? What am I saying then? That an idol is anything, or what is offered to idols is anything? Rather that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons, and not to God. And I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and of the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he?
Okay, well, I think what Paul's going back and talking about this idea about food offered to idols that we talked about it right at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And the group he's addressing here, I think, are the people that understand that it's okay to eat meat that was sacrificed to idols because idols aren't real.
Right.
Right. That's who I think he's talking to. Now he's giving some further instruction about maybe some of the details of how this ought to take place.
Right.
So the first thing he does is he gives some examples, and I think that's why he starts off flee from idolatry. He goes, that's the thing we're going to talk about. And he goes, I speak as to a wise man. So he's saying, hey, you guys, I know you guys aren't stupid.
Right. You should know better.
Right. So because you're not stupid, I'm going to give you several examples.
Right.
To try to explain what I'm about to say. So the first example he uses is the Lord's Supper. So that's why he says the cup of blessing which we bless. What does he mean by the cup?
The blood of Christ.
The blood of Christ. He's not talking about this physical object, right? He's talking about the blood that was sacrificed on the cross, and we partake of the fruit of the vine,
right?
To remember that. That's what he's talking about when he says the cup. He says the cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? What's communion mean?
Sharing in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He says, the bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? Of course, we can go back and what is that, Matthew chapter 26, where the Lord institutes where Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper. We can see all of those elements there.
Mm-hmm. He
says, for we, though many, are one bread and one body, for we all partake of that one bread. So I think it's just this idea that when we are partaking of the Lord's Supper, we're all communing together. We're all partaking together of this thing.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
I would agree. I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm just trying to talk this through. So right. Because I'm trying to understand it myself.
Right. Yeah. And so for we are many are one bread and one body, for we all partake of that one bread. Observe Israel after the flesh. Now he's switching gears.
Yeah, so he's going to use another example.
Mm-hmm. And observe Israel after the flesh. Are not those who eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar?
So what's that?
Well, they're seeking after things that are no longer required, and they're seeking after fleshly things.
Well, what I think the reason I think he uses that example is so when they made the sacrifices on the altar,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't burn everything up. Some of that meat got ate.
Right.
The priests ate it, and a lot of times the people partook of that as well.
Right. If I understand it, would I think we talked about this before, how it would sometimes end up in the markets.
Yeah, but this is talking about Israel, the sacrifices in the old temple.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He says, "Observe Israel after the flesh. Are not those who eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? They kind of communed with God in that manner.
Right.
What am I saying then? Paul says.
Right.
That an idol is anything? Or what is offered to idols is anything?
Right.
So he's making a point that when you partake of things sacrificed on an altar, or you're communing with that altar, you're communing with the death of Christ. You're communing with Christ in that thing.
Right.
He says, rather that the things with the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. He says, and I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and of the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than He? I think what was happening is these almost as I was about to make my big point.
Yeah,
my microphone fell. What was happening was these Christians who were eating of this meat offered to idols, they were probably going to the temple and eating it in the temple where these sacrifices were being. So it's not that there was anything wrong, but the way they were doing it.
Right. They were taking part in the thing which should not be done.
Yes.
Not that meat was set aside in some special way. Not that the meat was really wrong, as we read before. It was that they were actually mingling themselves in with the sin.
Yeah. So the next verses here, this all gets clearer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So verse 23, he says, "All things are lawful for me." Right. So he goes back to that, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. He says, "Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being." Now he gives some specific instructions. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market. He says, asking no questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. So, what would you say is the breakdown of that?
Well, put others first. Think of the conscience of your brothers and sisters and those around you. You're setting an example.
Yes.
When you're out in the world and people are watching, and especially as Christians, we have to be careful that we don't allow ourselves to look like something that Christ would be offended by.
Yes. Yeah, so that's why he says, well, when you go buy meat, he goes, just don't ask where it's from.
Right.
Because it doesn't matter, but don't ask.
Right.
And it's for conscience sake. He says the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness.
Right. So and I think that, when it comes to conscience, I think verse 23, just speaks volumes. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. We have free will. We can do whatever it is that we choose on this earth, but then we have to stop and think, is this going to be helpful to me as a Christian? Is this going to help my family? Yeah. You can choose to go places and to do things, but is that going to help or hinder your walk with Christ?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
or your family.
So, John, you could drink some Jack Daniels because you got a cough, right?
Right.
But if you go out and sit out in the front yard and drink it,
Right.
it may give the wrong impression.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's the idea of all things being lawful. And there are things, on this earth that people abuse every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And those are things that, as Christians, we have to be sure that we don't put ourselves in a position where people are looking at us and saying, well, look, why you want me to be different? You want me to come and run with you as a Christian, but you're doing the same things as the people down the road.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He continues on, verse 27. If those who do not believe invite you to dinner, and you desire to go, eat whatever is set before you, asking no questions for conscience sake. Same thing, right? Mm-hmm. He says, but if anyone says to you, this was offered to idols, do not eat it for the sake of the one who told you, and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. All right, so now you come over to my house and I have some pepperoni.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I like pepperoni.
Right.
And I said, oh, John, this pepperoni was sacrificed to the pizza god.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you say, well, since I know that, since you're saying it's dedicated to this God, I'm going to,
right.
That's not, I can't be part of that.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to give that appearance of endorsing that.
And if you're sacrificing and you're making that known, then, that's where your mindset is. And if I were to take part in that, I'm strengthening that.
Yeah.
In your mindset that, well, this is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's and we have to think about others, and I think probably especially in America, we have this idea of don't tell me what to do. I can do whatever I want.
You can't tell me what to do.
Right. You're not my mom. and so we get all wrapped up in that, but we fail to see that we still have an example to set, and we have to think of others as what is the verbiage that I'm looking for, to think of others more highly than yourself.
Yeah. Oh yeah. When my cousin Chris and my uncle Vern and I used to have a construction company, and when we would work together, maybe there was we're putting in a garage door, and we'd always have somebody who was in charge of reading the directions. So, right, and they'd say, well, now you need to hook the spring onto the side wall. One of us would always go, you can't tell me what to do. So,
right.
It was a big joke, but a lot of people are like that. They can't take instruction.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the issues that a lot of people have just with religion. Is they take it as just a bunch of rules yelling at you.
Yeah.
But in reality, when you truly understand who Christ is, it turns it around. It's no longer a drudgery.
Yeah.
But it's I want to do that because I know who He is and I want to be pleasing.
Some of the laws of man are stupid.
Right.
But none of the laws of God are stupid.
Right.
So you gotta make that distinction.
For anybody who's married, why do we do the honeydew lists? Why do we?
Because we like not sleeping on the couch.
we like to live. But you do those things out of love.
Yes. Is that the reason?
Because just think about it. If I came over and made out a list of things for you to do, like Julie does, you'd tell me to get lost.
I say, well, John, I'm a little busy right now, but we'll figure it out. But yeah, I know what you're saying.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. We do those things out of love, and that's the relationship that we have with Christ. It involves understanding and wanting to do those things.
So in verse 28 it says, conscience, I say, not your own, but that of the other. For why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience? But if I partake with thanks, why am I evil spoken of for the food over which I give thanks? Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to the Jews or to the Greeks or to the church of God. just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. So the idea is the reason he's giving all these instructions, and the reason he started out way back in the last episode where Paul talked about serving all men.
Mm-hmm.
This is all still kind of part of that same conversation.
Right.
He said he became weak to those who were weak and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he did whatever he needed to do to not offend people.
Right.
And do what was right in God's eyes at the same time.
Right. Yeah, that's I think the crux to this whole thing is do it all to the glory of God.
Yeah.
So can I eat this? Can I sit down with these people as they partake in a ritual sacrifice to some other god? Can I do that and glorify God at the same time? No.
Yeah.
And we have to think that way.
All right, let's talk about women's head coverings.
Oh, I've been waiting for this. Yep, I've been waiting to hear your your learned opinions.
Well, I don't know about that, but go ahead and read chapter 11, 1 through 16.
All right. Chapter 11 of verse 1. Imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things and keep the traditions just as I delivered them to you. But I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man is not from woman, but woman from man. Nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. For this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor woman independent of man in the Lord. For as a woman came from a man, even so man also comes through woman. But all things are from God. Judge among yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. But if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor do the churches of God.
All right, so this is a much, we don't talk about this a whole lot because
Right.
it's hard to make sense of some of it, but I guess to set this up, the thing that I want to, the first point I want to bring out, and I know you're going to grab right hold of this.
All righty.
Does the Bible talk about people practicing cultural practices that were a thing in their day, but maybe aren't today?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe do we practice cultural practices in our society that weren't a thing back then?
Yeah.
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 Right. So there is that in the Bible. So later on in chapter 16, when Paul's closing the letter, he says, "Greet each one with a holy kiss."
Mm-hmm.
Do we do that today?
No.
Why not? It says to do it.
I've been places where people have, and it throws me off a little because it's just not. But yeah, it's just not something that is a part of our culture today.
Yeah, it's not. So another one would be foot washing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we're not walking around in the desert with sandals on, and our feet aren't filthy.
Right. Right.
It was a cultural practice.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the clothing that we wear today,
yeah,
there's in many cases, a uniform, that comes to be, if you're going to church, you're getting into your Sunday best kind of thing, but that wasn't, those things weren't the case, not in the same way, back in back in biblical times.
Yeah, I mean, and this is starting to wane, but I know probably in the the 50s through the 80s or maybe even the mid 90s, what kind of outfit did the preacher always wear?
Yeah, a suit and tie.
A suit and tie.
Or if you're talking about me growing up in the Methodist church, not to be confused with the Lord's church, he always wore a robe with phylacteries, the thing going down the sides, and all kinds of, and we see the Pope dressing up in certain things, and that's just not.
But certainly the suit and tie was a cultural practice,
right,
that went on in the United States for about 100 years.
Right.
It's interesting. It's kind of a phenomenon. It wasn't a thing that's been practiced for thousands of years. It's just a thing. For some reason,
right.
People think that's what preachers are supposed to wear, although there's no biblical command for that.
Right.
Another example of this, I think, about cultural practices mixed in with direct commandments is in 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10. Some instructions to the ladies here.
1 Timothy 2 verse 9, in like manner also, that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair, or gold, or pearls, or costly clothing.
But we'll stop there.
Okay.
So part of that is cultural, right?
Mm-hmm.
And part of it's a command that would apply today, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first part is a universal truth, right?
The modest apparel.
And modest apparel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with propriety and moderation. Okay, that applies, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Then it says not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing.
Right.
Well, I don't think about braided hair as being somebody putting on airs. Not today.
Right.
In fact, if you see a girl with braided hair, you think, oh, that's a country girl down there.
Right.
It's just not a thing that culturally we associate with somebody who's putting on airs,
right,
who's not being modest. Braided hair is not a sign of immodesty.
Right. And there's a link here to 1 Peter 3 at verse 3. It says, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. I latch on to this when I've talked about this before. I latch on to verse 3, that word merely. Do not let your adornment be merely outward.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be the only pretty thing about you.
Yeah, but it can't. But you can be pretty, right?
Right.
Not you, John, right. but to the ladies, right? So here's the thing. So we've established that there are maybe some cultural things that are mentioned in the Bible,
right,
that have changed since then. And when we go back here to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, he uses these ideas of traditions and customs.
Yeah.
He uses that. So I think some of this stuff has to do with customs that those people lived under.
Right.
Because culturally, some of these things, are not a thing today.
Right.
So that's my first my first ideas about how to understand this.
Yeah.
There are some things in here that are cultural and some things are not. So then how do you separate the things that are cultural from the things that are not?
Well, I mean, you can kind of tell how it is.
You can kind of tell how it is by reading it. So the other thing and I would put in here is, and it says that women are supposed to have their hair covered when prophesying or praying.
Mm-hmm.
In a public assembly today,
right,
women are not prophesying or praying.
Right.
Now, people will say, well, when a prayer is being led and I bow my head, I'm praying. But
Right.
I'd have to disagree with that because you're being led in prayer.
Just yeah, that's true.
I mean, when Jesus had a meal, it says he broke like when he fed the 5,000. He says he broke the bread and gave thanks. Mm-hmm. He gave thanks.
Right.
Not everybody else didn't give thanks. He gave the thanks.
And just a few chapters forward in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 34, it says, we're speaking of in the assembly, let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but they are also to be submissive, as the law also says. And if they want to learn something, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is shameful for women to speak in the church. And it's that's kind of connected, and it's in the thought pattern there. And again, before you beat us up in the comments or something, you have to take these things into context, because didn't we just read just a little bit ago that the woman is not it cannot be separated from the man. They're together.
Yeah.
And in other places in the scriptures it talks about, speaking of the marriage bed, that the man is not in control of his body, but the woman is.
Yeah.
And the woman is not in control of her body, but the man is.
Yep.
So there's an equality there.
Yeah.
That you see, but there are certain roles
mm-hmm.
that have been set forth by the Lord, and that happens to be one that is not the one of the woman.
So my thought is women, if there are women who are praying or prophesying in the assembly, then they should have their head covered.
Yeah.
But women from the reading you gave probably shouldn't be making public prayers.
Right.
And they don't prophesy anymore.
Yeah.
So I would say, based on those facts alone, I would say probably women do not need to wear a head covering today.
Yeah, and here's what I was mentioning in verse 11 when we read, nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor woman independent of man in the Lord.
Right.
For as woman came from man, even so a man also comes through woman, but all things are from God. And then it says, judge among yourselves. And I think this is a key point.
Yes, it is.
Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? So that judge for yourselves, that's connected there to that statement. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not even nature itself teach you that a man has long hair? It is a dishonor to it, but if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her. And then in verse 16, I think this is kind of a clincher. But if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor do the churches of God. So judge for yourselves. That's kind of leaving it up in the air. If you want to wear a head covering, then do it.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with that.
And if you're going to fight about it, realize that there's no such custom here. So you're fighting about something that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of this stuff. I mean, it was. And you can read secular history.
Mm-hmm.
Even at the town Tarsus, where Paul came from, I believe that it was like for a woman to walk publicly without her head covered, it was a huge faux pas.
Yeah.
That it was a cultural thing for them.
It is in some places still today.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But here in the good old U.S. of A., it is not a cultural thing.
Right.
Even for a woman to have her head shaved, it's not. I mean, I don't believe we look at in our culture that being shameful.
Mm-hmm.
But when we see a woman with no hair, we usually think, "Oh man, she has cancer."
Right.
And
you just because we only read to 16.
Yeah.
But if you just pop ahead just a few verses there, it says. He says in verse 17, now in giving these instructions, I do not praise you, since you come together, not for the better, but for the worse. For first of all, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and in part I believe it. So he's just telling them, that they shouldn't be contentious about this head covering thing.
Right.
And then he moves into, I'm hearing that you guys are split on these things.
Yeah. John, we better stop this.
All right. Yeah, we won't open up a new section there. So. Anyway, we might have We might have made some sense.
We
out
might
of
have
that.
made some. You know what? I think when you there are a lot of different teachings about this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think this is one of those things, and since I'm not a woman,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't. It's, I guess it's not as maybe not as pertinent to me, but for the ladies out there, I would read this and talk it over with your husband or maybe somebody, somebody else who's a Christian. If you have concerns about this,
Mm-hmm.
and come to some conclusion and make your own judgment on what you should do.
Yeah, just as a quick recap, I suppose. In verse 6 of where we read, for if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered. It's just kind of that back and
If it
forth.
is shameful,
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's leaving it up to the person's judgment.
Yeah.
And I really do think that the clincher, you've read through all of this, and then the clincher is in verse 16. There's just no such custom in the Church of God.
Yeah.
And that lays it out there. I mean, I know brethren, good, faithful brethren whom I trust, and I know to be well studied and faithful in to the Lord. And I know that the women and their families cover their heads in the assembly.
I do. I know a man who I really really respect,
Mm-hmm.
and he believes this, and
Right. Yeah. And that is, again, from everything that we can read here, is fully within the authority of a person, any person, to come to that decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. Well, thanks for joining in. We'll see you next time.